Hello, and thank you for clicking. My name's Chris, and I'm going to call this latest venture the Catholic Ponderer. You might be wondering what it is or what we hope to achieve. To be honest, it's all a bit foggy. All it is I think Catholics in the modern world, lay Catholics especially, are obliged to, shall we say, flood the airwaves. I suppose that's quite a dated term, but flood the culture, certainly online, with content that people of all ages can access, get some thinking, talking, discussing. So that's the idea, really. Firstly, a quick bit about me. Um, I am a Catholic chaplain in a certain institution that I won't specify, but I am not ordained. So I am a lay Catholic man, but doesn't mean in any sense I purport to know everything or get everything right or be an expert in any way on theology. I'm hoping this adventure can be about prompting questions, discussions, and I've no doubt if any of you do check out or tune in or anything like that, that I will make mistakes that will be later pointed out to me. But without that, a quick few thoughts as we finish 2019. So, first of all, slightly belatedly, but a very Merry Christmas. It is an octave, so that's a season of 8 days. So I am still technically in time, even if I am quite good at being late for things usually. So hopefully you had a very nice Christmas day, despite COVID-19 and any restrictions, certainly in the United Kingdom or wherever you find yourselves. In some sense, I suppose it's been quite nice to have to focus on the smaller things once again. After all, the Christ child in the manger is really a minimising of things, whilst being God made man and being, the centre of our faith, really beginning. It is still bringing things into that macro level and bringing it into that small size. Obviously, for the people who won't have had a very nice Christmas are those that we keep in our thoughts and prayers who've lost loved ones and been bereaved, whether through COVID or just through normal circumstance at this particular time of year. But other than that, I hope you've managed to make it to a church at some point. As much as I think the online facilities are fantastic and a lot of priests have wrestled with those technicalities, I do think it's ever more important to get yourself booked in if need be and get to a church, particularly even during the octave. Perhaps, as I'm going to try to do, on the 1st of January, which will be the end of the octave. Mary, Mother of God, is the feast day, and in most countries, certainly in Malta, it is a holy day of obligation. So I very much encourage anyone to get into a church for that day. And just a last thought, which when this is published will no doubt be probably a few hours expired, but today, the 29th of December, happens to be the feast day of one of my favourite English saints, St Thomas Becket of Canterbury. I'm sure many of my fellow UK folks would be familiar with him. Canterbury Cathedral and his name are quite famously linked, and even the Anglican Church still honour him as much as the Catholics do. Of course, he came from a time when Christianity was Catholic Christianity in England, but he's always held a special place in my mind for a couple of reasons. One, well, first of all, if you don't know the story, Thomas Becket was the Archbishop of Canterbury. That's one of the highest offices, if not the highest office, bar a cardinal, in the Christian Catholic Church at the time. The 1100s, I think it is, basically representing Rome and the Church in England. And he disagreed. He used to be in conflicts with King Henry II of England, who, like many monarchs, was used to getting his way and hearing the word yes a lot. So when he heard no, things didn't go too well, and traditional legend, I do love a good legend, says that he flew into a rage at Thomas for not allowing him to do something, and in his private rage, in his apartments, and the royal apartments is quoted to have said, depending on your choice, either turbulent or troublesome, but something along the lines of, "Who will rid me of this turbulent or troublesome priest?" And in the rage, a few of his loyal knights heard him, thought, "Oh, okay, the king's not enjoying this archbishop being around," and whether they were men of faith themselves or not, or whether they were doing it out of self-advancement and wanting position and status and wealth and so on, they just took it upon themselves, with no instruction, to journey to Canterbury and cut St. Thomas down where he stood at the altar in his church and in his cathedral, which is why it became a pilgrimage spot. A lot of medieval art show him with swords right through his head, and if you've been to the Venerable English College in Rome, for example, one of the sort of gilt-plated icons up there features him with a sword through his head, because when he was told by his priests to flee the scene and run away, he calmly knelt down before the tabernacle and the altar and resolved himself to his fate. And there we go, bled on the altar in his own church. But really, the two interesting things about the story and his that, sort of somewhat obvious but maybe overlooked. One is, it's easy to hear the story and assume that Thomas and Henry II were, not maybe sworn enemies, but bitter rivals for most of their life, one representing the powerhouse that was the church, and one representing the powerhouse that was the country and the crown. But that's not true. The way medieval England worked, Henry II and Thomas grew up being friends, and sources tell us that they were often hunting partners and had a close fraternal bond almost, in the same way that brothers don't necessarily agree and, don't say yes to each other. And in medieval England, you've got to be a brave man to turn around and say no to the king. And Thomas was one of those people that, he grew up when Henry wasn't king, he was prince, and would have been more able and felt more confident saying no and saying uncomfortable truths. But anyway, when Henry was king, he'd found the previous archbishop to be a bit of a pain in the backside. Not saying yes to things, being awkward, putting Rome and the true faith first. And so when I believe it was he died, when he died, he was looking to replace the Archbishop of Canterbury with a friend, with someone that he basically could earwig and, have a little whisper in their ear and have them be a bit of a yes man. So of course he chose Thomas Becket, thinking he's a good pal of mine, he'll stand in, he'll do what I say, he'll help me out more than the previous annoying person. But he never seemed to stop to think that actually the reason in his mind he valued Thomas so much as a friend before any royal status or church status was that he was brave and confident enough to disagree with him. And of course that is what Thomas continued to do. In fact, he continued to do it more so with great fervour. In fact, one of the most surprising things, because it doesn't happen very often even in the modern world with human beings, when Thomas was given the status of archbishop, it's recorded that he famously turned to a life of sort of better piety and fasting and so on. The one thing Henry II never expected was his friend to become a very devoted person in post. So an interesting thought there, because so many of us feel like the jobs or positions, it could be fatherhood, it could be so many different, it could be the job role you've got to work, it could be being a friend to someone who's in need, it could be anything at all, it could be caring for an elderly or sick relative. So many of us feel like we're not called or ready for jobs and we're not equipped. And yet look what Thomas Becket did. He was given something that he wasn't really expecting, and instead of moaning or saying he couldn't do it or whatnot, he took it, and he not only had a go at it, he took it and did the sort of things that were more common in medieval England. Just read Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, for example, that we've lost something of in modern England. The idea of if something isn't right or sure, then there are ways to seek solace about that through prayer, through fasting, through changing the style of one's life. in the hope that you find more peace. And that's exactly what he did. But notably, Thomas Becket's path to peaceful life, peaceful living for him, was not a road of peace. He may not have fought with swords or anything like that, but he fought with words, he fought with personality, he clashed with the king again and again and again. He ended up exiled to France for a few years, and then having to come back to England and so on. Him and Henry constantly and bitterly falling out over what was essentially a case many years before Henry VIII came along of church power versus state power. And when Henry put his friend Thomas in charge of this, remember this was a united Christian world and Europe and so on, when he put him there, he basically said, choose me, choose the state. I'm putting you in a position where you're supposed to bend the knee, you're supposed to genuflect to church authority outwardly, but I want you to pick state authority, your friend, over that, which in effect is choose me, a human person, your pal, over Christ. And Thomas Becket would not do that, which I think is marvellous, really, and is rather telling for the modern world. Think how easy, how we have a culture now of niceness and not, it's unfair to call it kindness, but of people being correct in what they say and using correct words and terminology and being far too afraid of saying this, that, or even simply saying, I disagree with you, for fear that somebody goes, well, that makes you a conservative, a leftist, a racist, a this, or that, and so on. The debate has been rather thinned out. But Thomas Becket, and St. Thomas Becket no less, doesn't fear to stand up and disagree with the highest office in his country, even when it costs him, financially, physically, comfort-wise, and involves him having to flee the country. Imagine that. How many of you, because I know I would be very bad at it, could possibly disagree with someone to that level, putting your very daily comfort on the line as such. And the last thing before I go is just, again, quite a good one to apply to the modern world. On the flip side is, the story goes that Henry II was massively bereaved after this. He was famous for flights of temper and losing his rag quite a bit. And supposedly he realised somewhere in that, having lost his rage, that those loyal knights of his had disappeared. And he'd suspected as much, like you do, that gut-wrenching feeling when you think someone's walked off and got the wrong idea. You said words in rage and they've wandered off to do something. And it was too late, of course. Thomas Becket had been martyred and murdered on the altar steps of his cathedral. So, really, it shows you the importance of words. We have quite a culture now, thanks to mass literacy and communication and devices and so on, even what I'm doing right now, that anybody and everybody can talk, read, write, and put their words out everywhere, and almost, not that I believe this, but almost like there's a constant stream of consciousness, if you will, that everyone has to say their bit on social media and this, that, and everything. We're constantly bombarded by it. It's no wonder, even as Catholics, that we're probably at an all-time low of people reading scriptures, because there's so much proliferation of everything else to read. There's novels, there's non-fiction, there's autobiographies, there's this, that, and everything. But it's interesting that the King of England, no less, who would have been a mighty figure back in that time, actually had to realise, was humbled to realise that he had to choose his words carefully, and when he didn't, look at the consequences. So that rounds up a few thoughts. Please do comment or get in touch by all means with any feedback or particular thoughts. Please, I ask that you understand this is a very new venture, and I do work full time, so it's very much hoofed and on the side, and it will be, hence the Catholic Ponderer, inaccurate and just sometimes stream of consciousness myself and thoughts. But I'd love people to let us know, and if it's useful, or if it helps people pray or think of particular devotions, or if you want me to cover certain topics as we go along, that would be grand too. And please do feel free to share with friends and family as well. particularly as we go into the new year. Maybe we can get a great Catholic online evangelising, certainly for the United Kingdom, as it is needed more than ever, system going. But other than that, all that remains for me to say is I wish you the best 2021. Hopefully we'll see the back of COVID-19 and we will return to not a normal life, because normal life certainly in my pocket of England involves people being very unchurchy, being very secular, and being the opposite of Thomas Becket and not being very brave. So I would ask that, I pray in fact, that we return to life not as we knew it, but somewhat renewed in spirit, in fervour, in fraternity, and seeking to embed our own communities that bit much more. But yes, I hope 2021 brings whatever you would like from it. I'm sure God will hear your prayers and will do what he believes to be best in your and your loved ones' lives. Other than that, please take the very best of care. God bless.